We're live. Hello. Hey there. Welcome to the Geeks of Mucklebee. Just for people that don't know us, my name is Nick.
My name is Rose.
My name is Oliver.
And we're the Geeks of Mucklebee.
Hey. So we are doing something completely new for us. As a family, we are big on books, reading. We've always got books in our hand and all of that sort of stuff. But one passion that we all share is Harry Potter. So one of the things we thought we would do is do a read along, and it's basically if you out there have never come across the Harry Potter books, then this is a great way to have a listen in. We will number each of these streams so that you can follow them, or if you just want someone to have a read to or read with or read along with us, that's what this whole thing's about. This is about being a book club. So the first one we are starting with, yeah,
Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix. Not the Order of Phoenix. That's a bit early.
That is a bit early. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. There we go. So here we go.
Phoenix. That was so
Relax. Maybe you saw a phoenix somewhere. No?
There's a phoenix in my book.
Maybe. Maybe when you looked over at Oliver's, it was the last book picture that you looked at. Yeah.
Maybe.
So yeah, read along with us. Take it as it. We wasn't expecting anybody really. We don't know if people are going to turn up. We don't know if people are going to get into this. But anywho, we love the Potter book. Some people have never read these all the way through.
Huh?
Some people have never read these all the way through.
Yeah.
Oh, hey Corpse, how are you? Hey Darth, how are you?
A free shady version online.
Oh, right. Rax, brilliant. Yeah, there we go. So this is it. This is all we're going to do is read a few chapters. We're either going to share a chapter, because as you can hear, my voice is a bit in and out, or we'll do a chapter by chapter, and we'll roughly try and do 3 chapters minimum a stream. I think that's fair, isn't it? Because you're just going to get sick of us otherwise. And then we've just got to keep it regularly enough that we tick through the books, and then that way, if there is a Litly out there that's new to, they can read along with us and all of that sort, and they can read this at a completely separate time. And if, to be morbid, I'm so sorry, my darlings.
Oh no.
But if we get through these books and I get hit by a bus, you can sit there with your children and say, hey, there's your dead grandpa. No. But you know, it's there. It's all good. Okay, I'm sorry to take it there. Anywho, let's get started. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to kick off?
Sure.
Here we go.
I think the hay fever pill starting to kick in for me.
Oh, the what? The hay fever pill. Stay with us, kid. Stay with us, kid.
I can feel it.
Do you feel your senses dulling?
I feel my eyes drooping.
So don't excuse Rose if she nods off. She might dribble, but we'll leave her to it.
I mess up a whale too.
We are going. Oh, if you miss, so what? You're human. You're allowed to miss up loads of words. Miss up. I've got no chance. And yeah, if you're at home, feel free to read along or simply listen. What I'm going to do, I've got the illustrated version by Jim Kay here. Can you see that? And what I will do on Discord, some of these illustrations are amazing, and I've created a book club thread. Our Discord server is in the description attached to this stream. And so what I will do, just a couple of the favorite shots of the books and all the rest of it, I'll post it on there. So if you want to see what I'm looking at when I go, oh, that's a fantastic, you can have a look. So chapter 1. Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to quickly say that I used to like it in at school and stuff, because the teacher would sometimes read to us at the end of the day, and you used to close your eyes and put your head on the table and just listen to it.
Oh, really? There we go, guys. I'm going to send you all to sleep. You know, if you've got trouble sleeping, this is going to be it. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over the garden fences spying on her neighbours. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted. They also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it, if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursley-ish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbours would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never, ever seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on a dull grey Tuesday, our story starts. Oh, sorry, did I get that right? When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar: a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realise what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats can't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except the large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos, standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and he was wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on. And a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived at the Grunnings car park, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people, he made several important telephone calls, and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. There was a lot of whispering excitedly too. And he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters. That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers, as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurriedly up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized the telephone, and almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his moustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter was wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure that there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He had never, ever even seen the boy. It might have been a Harvey or a Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he had had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realised that the man was wearing a violet cloak. That was cloak, not coke. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passer-by stare, "Don't worry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." Then the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled and hurried to his car and set off home. He was hoping, he was imagining things, which he never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. Not surprised that, eh? As he pulled into the driveway, number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he had spotted that morning. It was now sitting on the garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had all the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behaviour? Mr. Dursley wondered, trying to pull himself together. He let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had had a nice normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Nextdoor's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learnt a new word, shan't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the latest reports on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in the daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds, flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newsreader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now over to Jim McGuffin for the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that. But I know it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of rain I promised yesterday, they had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair, Shooting stars all over Britain. Owls flying by daylight. Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place. And a whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room, carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He was going to have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? I do apologise because every voice I'm going to do for this character is going to be different. As he expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended that she didn't have a sister. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff. On the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled, owls, shooting stars, and there was a lot of funny-looking people in town today. So, snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her lot. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared to tell her he heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, their son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Miss Dursley stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me. Oh, yes, said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as he went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well that he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside had showed no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed in the next street, nor when 2 owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently that you'd have thought it just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen in Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak which swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realise that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. But he did seem to realise that he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, I should have known. He had found what he was looking for inside his pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again, and the next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer, until the only lights left in the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall. He smiled he turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses, exactly the shape of the markings the cat had had around its eyes. She too was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun, and she looked distinctly ruffled. How did you know it was me? She asked. My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly. You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day, said Professor McGonagall. All day? When you could have been celebrating? I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here. Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. Oh yes, everybody's celebrating all right, she said impatiently. You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no, even the Muggles have noticed something's going on. And if it was on their news, she jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. I heard it. Flocks of owls shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They've been bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I bet that was Daedalus Diggle. Never had much sense. You can't blame them, said Dumbledore gently. They've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably, but that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in Muggle clothes, swapping rumours. She threw a sideways sharp glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't. So she went on, a fine thing it would be if on the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us all. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore. It seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a sherbet lemon? A what? A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of Muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think this was the moment for sherbet lemons. As I say, even if you know who has got, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense for 11 years, I've been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking two sherbet lemons, seemed not to notice. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I've never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know. Oh, all right, Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have, only because you're too, well, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, the owls are nothing to the rumours that are flying around. You know that what everyone's saying about why he's disappeared, but what finally stopped him? It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached a point where she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason she'd been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day. For neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, that she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another sherbet lemon and did not answer. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumour is that Lily and James Potter they're dead. Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James, I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. Oh, Albus. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill the little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power somehow broke, and that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding. Of all the things to stop him, but in the name of heaven, how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a sniff as he took out a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands, but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way. Yes, said Professor McGonagall, and I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here of all places. I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and to his uncle. They're the only family he has left now. You can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come and live here. It's for the best. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older, and I've written him a letter. A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore? You think you can explain all of this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if the day was known as Harry Potter Day in future. There'll be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very serious over the top of his half-moon glasses. It would be enough to turn the boy's head. Famous before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be growing up away from all of that until he's ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed and said, Yes, you're right, of course. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it's wise to be trusting Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly, but you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to... What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up at the sky, and a huge motorbike fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. The motorbike was huge. It was nothing to the man if the motorbike was huge, it was nothing to the man sitting astride it. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild, long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of dustbin lids, and his feet in leather boots were like baby dolphins. In his vast muscular arms, he was holding the bundles of blankets. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. At last. Where do you get that motorbike? Oh, sorry, Hagrid, Dumbledore said, sounding relieved. At last. Where did you get that motorbike? Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir, said the giant, climbing carefully off his motorbike as he spoke. Young Sirius Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir. No problem. No problems, were there? No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but it got him out all right before the muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we were flying over Bristol. I suppose I should be trying to do that in a West Country accent, but anyway. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over a bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy fast asleep under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead. They could see a curiously shaped cut like a bolt of lightning. Is that what? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, said Dumbledore. You'll have that scar forever. Can you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I have one myself above my left knee, which is perfect. It's a perfect map of the London Underground. Well, give him here, Hagrid. We'd better get this over with. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards the Dursleys' house. Could I just say goodbye to him, sir? Said Hagrid. He bent over his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly, Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Shh! Hissed Professor McGonagall. You'll wake the Muggles. Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. But I can't stand it. Lily and James dead, and poor Harry off to live with Muggles. Yes, it's all very sad, but get a grip of yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found, Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak and tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back for the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood there and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, Dumbledore said finally, that's that. We've no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations. Yeah, said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. I'd best get the bike away. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir. Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out the silver put-outer. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps, so that Privet Drive suddenly glowed orange, and he could make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned his heel, and with a swish of his cloak, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you'd expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blanket without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, know that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." There we go. Right, guys, I don't want you to feel under pressure about doing voices or anything like that. You only read as much or whatever you want.
Yep.
Rose, you've got the effects off the pill at the moment. How is everybody? What have we got?
I can read the next one if you want.
I want an illegal pizza.
Oh
To
no,
Harry Potter.
it was
You should have seen some of the ones they were doing.
there.
Oh gosh, Linux. Okay, right. Yeah, I've got to fix the site at the moment. It went really weird on me, so it's being rebuilt. I've got to rebuild it at the moment. That's next week's stuff.
Earlier, Corporal said turning the digital page of my book.
Oh, cool. Right.
Turning the digital
Guys, there's a couple of fantastic images in that. I mean, the picture of the illustration of Hagrid is amazing, and there's this really fantastic inky shot. I've got to show you that one. This is one of my favourites. Look at that. Can you see that? Oh, great! I love the illustration. So I will take a couple of these and just post it. And the one of Hagrid.
Yeah, Thomas said listening intently, slowly turning the digital page, turns the voice page.
Cool. Okay. Right, Rose, I think you should do chapter 2.
Yeah.
Just because I know what it's like to struggle with when it's getting warm, and read as much as you want.
Yeah.
So
I'll
what are
read
we
some
feeling?
of
How long have we been? Half an hour. Everybody, shall we go for another chapter, guys? Yeah? Yeah, Thomas, it's fantastic. It's the illustrated ones. Really, they are expensive, but they're really worth getting. So I'm going to have this nice set, and all these extra books that we've got, we will be giving away. Okay, yes, please. Okay, another chapter. So, okay. Rose, the Vanishing Glass, chapter 2.
Yeah.
This is the, yeah, okay.
Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step, but Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different coloured bobble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photographs showed a large blonde boy riding his first bicycle on a roundabout at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice which made the first noise of the day. Up! Get up! Now! Harry woke up with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. Up! She screeched. Harry heard her walking towards the kitchen, and then the sound of a frying pan being put on the cooker. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he'd been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorbike in it. He had a funny feeling he'd had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. Are you up yet? She demanded. Nearly, said Harry. Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon. And don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Daddy's birthday. Harry groaned. What did you say? His aunt snapped through the door. Nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed and, after pulling a spider off of one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all of Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had got the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favourite punch bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was because all he had to wear was old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was the very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he got it. In the car crash when your parents died, she had said, and don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. That was the first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. Comb your hair, he barked, by way of morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut.
Do you want to read from this one because it's bigger? Or are you happy with that?
I'm happy with this.
Cool, okay.
Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon, He had a large pink face, not much neck, small watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that laid smoothly on his head, on his thick black head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry put the plates of egg and bacon on the
Pig in a
table.
wig. Sorry, Rose. Yeah, go on.
Harry put the plates of egg and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. Darling, you haven't counted Auntie Marge's presents, see? It's here under this big one for Mummy and Daddy. All right, 37 then, said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a huge Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously scented danger too, because she said quickly, I will buy you another 2 presents. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Maddox. That's very kind.
And we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Popkin? 2 more presents. Is that all right? Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. Finally, he said slowly, so I'll have 39 sweetens, said Aunt Petunia. Oh. Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. All right, then. Uncle Vernon chuckled. Little Toke wants his money's worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dudley. He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went down to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, the cine camera, a remote-control aeroplane, 16 new computer games, and a video recorder. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone, looking both angry and worried. Bad news, Vernon, she said. Mrs. Figg's broken her leg. She can't take him. She ducked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day, to adventure parks, hamburger bars, or the cinema. Every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Mrs. Figg made him look at the photographs of all the cats she'd ever owned. Now what? Said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry, as though he'd planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Figg had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. We could phone Marge, Uncle Vernon suggested. Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy. The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug. What about what's her name? Your friend, Yvonne. On holiday in Mallorca, snapped Aunt Petunia. You could just leave me here, Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change, and maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked at as though she'd just swallowed a lemon. And come back and find the house in ruins, she snarled. I won't blow up the house, said Harry, but they weren't listening. I suppose we could take him to the zoo, said Aunt Petunia slowly, and leave him in the car. That car's new. He's not sitting in it alone. Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried, but he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. Dinky Duddy-dums, don't cry. Mommy won't let him spoil your special day. That's hard to say.
Dinky Duddy-dums.
She cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. He always spoils everything. He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then, the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here, said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursley's car with Piers and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with them, but before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you," he had said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas." "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry. "Honestly." But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald,
Oh, gosh.
except for his fringe, which he left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imaging school the next day, where he was already laughed at for having his baggy clothes and sellotape glasses. Next morning, however, he had got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before. Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old jumper of Dudley's, brown with orange bobbles. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet, but it certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he got into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of one of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual, when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress, telling them Harry had been climbing school buildings, but all he'd tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Mrs. Figg's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favourite subjects. This morning it was motorbikes. "Roaring around like maniacs, the young hoodlums," he said, as the motorbike overtook them. "I had a dream about a motorbike," said Harry, remembering suddenly. "It was flying." Uncle Vernon nearly crashed into the car in front. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beetroot with a moustache. "Motorbikes don't fly." Dudley and Piers sniggered. I know they don't," said Harry. "It was only a dream." But he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than him asking questions, it was his talking about anything acting in a way it shouldn't, no matter if it was in a dream or even a cartoon. They seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys brought Dudley and Piers large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away, they brought him a cheap lemon ice lolly. It wasn't bad either, Harry thought, looking at it as they watched the gorilla scratching its head, looking remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde.
That's what I've got on mine.
Harry had the best morning he'd had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys so that Dudley and Piers, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back to their favourite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, where Dudley had a tantrum because his knickerbocker glory wasn't big enough. Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went into the reptile house. It was cool and dark in here, with lit windows along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see huge poisonous cobras and thick man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped his body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a dustbin. But at the moment, it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass, trying to disturb him all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. It winked. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head towards Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said quite plainly, "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, although he wasn't sure if the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "Where do you come from, anyway?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at a little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." "Was it nice there?" The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again, and Harry read on. This specimen was bred in the zoo. "Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil?" As the snake shook its head, a deafening shout behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley! Mrs. Dursley! Come and look at the snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. "Out of the way, you!" he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What happened next was so fast, no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leapt back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass in front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn a low hissing voice said, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying. "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director made himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong sweet tea, while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it had passed. But by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten off his leg, whilst Piers was swearing that it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, it was Piers calming down enough to say, "Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vernon waited until Piers was safely out the house before starting on Harry. He was so angry he could barely speak. He managed to say, "Go, cupboard, stay, no means," before he collapsed into a chair, and Aunt Petunia had to run and get him a large brandy. Harry lay in the dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dursleys were asleep yet. Until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking out to the kitchen for some food. He lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember, ever since he'd been a baby and his parents died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents died. Sometimes when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and a burning pain in his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and of course he was forbidden to ask any questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he'd been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were too. A tiny man with a violet top hat had bowed to him once whilst out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed him out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old woman, dressed in all green, had waved merrily at him once on a bus. A bald man, in a very long purple coat, had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day, and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter in his baggy clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang.
Well done, Rose. So that's the end of the second chapter. You can tell us if you want us to do a third. I think some of the bits there that are different, thinking about it from the film, is obviously Petunia has got blonde hair, and in the film she's got black hair.
Mm-hmm.
Dudley has got black hair, and in this has got blonde hair. Piers the friend is there.
There's so many more detail.
There is so
book.
much more detail, isn't there? The way that they really kind of build up the kind of mundane existence of the Dursleys and how horrid they are to Harry. I think anyone who's had a tough childhood can reminisce, or not reminisce, kind of identify with bits of this with Harry. It's fantastic.
Stephen Corporal think that this is better than a film.
Hey, there we go. That's
Corporal's
awesome.
playing an imaginary film in his head.
So, guys, are we going to do the third chapter? How far are we in? Carl, Rose, you got through that? Okay, we're roughly about half an hour a chapter. So I think that will take it isn't far in. Oh, you wanting to do this?
Sure.
Are you sure? You don't have to. I'm happy to if you're.
No, yeah, I'd like to.
Cool. Let's see if everybody else. You guys want in the third chapter? Cool. Third chapter. Here we go. Because I was planning about 3 chapters a string, and then we'll have a little chat about that at the end.
Chapter 3. The Letters from No One. The escape of the Brazilian boa constrictor earned Harry his longest ever punishment. By the time he was allowed out of his cupboard again, the summer holidays had started, and Dudley had already broken his new slime camera, crashed his remote control aeroplane, and first time on his racing bike, knocked down old Mrs. Figg as she crossed Privet Drive on her crutches. Harry was glad school was over, but there was no escaping Dudley's gang, who visited the house every single day. Piers, Dennis, Malcolm, and Gordon were all big and stupid, but as Dudley was the biggest and stupidest of the lot, he was the leader. The rest of them were all quite happy to join in Dudley's favourite sport, Harry hunting. This was why Harry spent as much time as possible out of the house, wandering around and thinking about the end of the holidays, where he could see a tiny ray of hope when September would be going off to secondary school. And for the first time in his life, he wouldn't be with Dudley. Dudley had had a place at Uncle Vernon's old school, Smeltings. Piers Polkiss was going there too. Harry, on the other hand, was going to Stonewall High, the local comprehensive. Dudley thought this was very funny. They stuffed people's heads down the toilet. First day at Stonewall, he told Harry. Want to come upstairs and practice? No thanks, said Harry. The poor toilet's never had anything as horrible as your head down it. It might be sick. Then he ran before Dudley could work out what he had said. One day in July, Aunt Petunia took Dudley to London to buy his Smartings uniform, leaving Harry at Mrs. Figg's. Mrs. Figg wasn't as bad as usual. It turned out she'd broken her leg tripping over one of her cats, and she didn't seem quite as fond of them as before. She let Harry watch television and gave him a bit of chocolate cake that had tasted as though she'd had it for several years. That evening, Dudley paraded around the living room for the family in his brand new uniform. Smarting's boys wore maroon tailcoats, orange knickerbockers, and flat straw hats called boaters. They also carried knobbly sticks used for hitting each other while the teachers weren't looking. This was supposed to be good training for later life. As he looked at Dudley in his new knickerbockers, Uncle Vernon said gruffly that it was the proudest moment of his life. Aunt Petunia burst into tears, and she couldn't believe that it was her ickle Dudleykins. He looked so handsome and grown up. Harry didn't trust himself to speak. He thought 2 of his ribs might have already cracked from trying not to laugh. There was a horrible smell in the kitchen next morning when Harry went in for breakfast. It seemed to be coming from a large metal tub in the sink. He went to have a look. The tub was full of what looked like dirty rags swimming in grey water. "What's this?" he asked Aunt Petunia. Her lips tightened, as they always did if he dared to ask a question. "Your new school uniform," she said. Harry looked in the bowl again. "Oh," he said. "I didn't realize it had to be so wet." "Don't be stupid," snapped Aunt Petunia. "I'm dyeing some of Dudley's old things grey for you. It will just look like everyone else's when I've finished." Harry seriously doubted this, but thought it best not to argue. He sat down at the table and tried not to think about how he was going to look on his first day at Stonewall High. Like he was wearing bits of old elephant skin, probably. Dolly and Uncle Vernon came in, both with wrinkled noses because of the smell from Harry's new uniform. Uncle Vernon opened his newspaper as usual, and Dudley banged his smarting stick, which he carried everywhere, on the table. They heard the click of the letterbox and the flop of letters on the doormat. "Get the post, Dudley," said Uncle Vernon from behind his paper. "Make Harry get it." "Get the post, Harry." "Make Dudley get it." "Poke him with your smarting stick, Dudley." Harry dodged the smarting stick and went to get the post. 3 things lay on the doormat. A postcard from Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, who was holidaying on the Isle of Wight, a brown envelope that looked like a bill, and a letter for Harry. Harry picked it up and stared at it, his heart twanging like a giant elastic band. No one, ever in his whole life, had written to him. Who would? He had no friends, no other relatives. He didn't belong to the library, so he had never even got root notes asking for books back. Yet here it was, a letter, addressed so plainly there could be no mistake. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The envelope was thick and heavy, made of yellowish parchment, and the address was written in emerald green ink. There was no stamp. Turning the envelope over, his hands trembling, Harry saw a purple wax seal, bearing a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake, surrounding a large letter H. "Hurry up, boy!" shouted Uncle Vernon from the kitchen. "What are you doing? Checking for letter bombs?" He chuckled at his own joke. Harry went back to the kitchen, still staring at his letter. He handed Uncle Vernon the bill and the postcard, sat down, and slowly began to open the yellow envelope. Uncle Vernon ripped open the bill, snorted in disgust, and flipped over the postcard. "Marge Sill," he informed Aunt Petunia, "ate a funny whelk." "Dad!" said Dudley suddenly. "Dad, Harry's got something!" Harry was on the point of unfolding his letter, which was written on the same heavy parchment as the envelope, when it was jerked sharply out of his hand by Uncle Vernon. "That's mine," said Harry, trying to snatch it back. "Who'd be writing to you?" sneered Uncle Vernon, shaking the letter open with one hand and glancing at it. His face went from red to green faster than a set of traffic lights, and it didn't stop there. Within seconds, it was greyish white of old porridge. "Petunia!" he gasped. Dudley tried to grab the letter to read it, but Uncle Vernon held it high out of his reach. Aunt Petunia took it curiously and read the first line. For a moment, it looked as though she might faint. She clutched her throat and made a choking noise. "Vernon! Oh my goodness! Vernon!" They stared at each other, seeming to have forgotten that Harry and Dudley were still in the room. Dudley wasn't used to being ignored. He gave his father a sharp tap on the head with his smarting stick. "I want to read that letter," he said loudly. "I want to read it," said Harry furiously, "as it's mine." "Get out, both of you," croaked Uncle Vernon, stuffing the letter back inside its envelope. Harry didn't move. "I want my letter," he shouted. "Let me see it," demanded Dudley. "Out!" roared Uncle Vernon, and he took both Harry and Dudley by the scruffs of their necks and threw them into the hall, slamming the kitchen door behind them. Harry and Dudley promptly had a furious but silent fight over who would listen at the keyhole. Dudley won, so Harry, his glasses dangling from one ear, lay flat on his stomach to listen at the crack between door and floor. "Vernon," said Aunt Petunia was saying in a quivering voice, Look at the address. How could they possibly know where he sleeps? You don't think they're watching the house?" "Watching, spying, been following us," muttered Uncle Vernon wildly. "What should we do, Vernon? Should we write back? Tell them we don't want—" Harry could see Uncle Vernon's shiny black shoes pacing up and down the kitchen. "No," he said finally. "No, we'll ignore it. They don't get an answer. Yes, that's best. We won't do anything. But I'm not having one in the house, Petunia. Didn't we swear when we took him in, we'd stamp out that dangerous nonsense?" That evening, when he got back from work, Uncle Vernon did something he'd never done before. He visited Harry in his cupboard. "Where's my letter?" said Harry, the moment Uncle Vernon squeezed through the door. "Who's writing to me?" "No one. It was addressed to you by mistake," said Uncle Vernon shortly. "I have burned it." "Oh, sorry, my news."
Okay, I'll carry on.
No, it's fine.
No, it's fine. It wasn't a mistake, said Harry angrily. "I had my cupboard on. It's okay. You can. I'll just do a bit, and then you can carry on." I've gone. Just carry on. Go on then.
Where are we?
Carry on from where you were.
Was it
I
just
burnt
you
it.
by mistake? I burned it.
I'm just thinking, if your hay fever's getting worse, did you take a pill today?
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah, you're going to get. Okay, go on. Carry on.
It was not a mistake," said Harry angrily. "It had my cupboard on it." "Silence!" yelled Uncle Vernon, and a couple of spiders fell from the ceiling. He took a few deep breaths and then forced his face into a smile, which looked quite painful. Yes, Harry. About this cupboard, your aunt and I have been thinking. You're really getting a bit big for it. We think it might be nice if we moved you into Dudley's second bedroom." "Why?" said Harry. "Don't ask questions," snapped his uncle. "Take the stuff upstairs now." Dudley's house had 4 bedrooms, one for Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, one for visitors, usually Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, one where Dudley slept, and one where Dudley kept all the toys and things that wouldn't fit into his first bedroom. It only took Harry one trip upstairs to move everything he owned from the cupboard to his room. He sat down on the bed and stared around him. Nearly everything in here was broken. The month-old sound camera was
Cine camera.
Cine, as in cinema.
Alright. Cine camera was lying on top of a small working tank Dudley had once driven over next door's dog. In the corner was Dudley's first ever television set, which he'd put his foot through when his favourite programme had been cancelled. There was a large bird cage which had once held a parrot that Dudley had swapped at school for a real air rifle, which was up on a shelf with the end all bent because Dudley had sat on it. Other shelves were full of books. They were the only things in the room that looked as though they'd never been touched. From downstairs came the sound of Dudley bawling at his mother. "I don't want him in there. I need that room. Make him get out." Harry sighed and stretched out on the bed. Yesterday, he'd have given anything to be up here. Today, he'd rather be back in his cupboard with that letter than up here without it. Next morning, at breakfast, everyone was rather quiet. Dudley was in shock. He'd screamed, whacked his father with a smelting stick, been sick on purpose, kicked his mother and thrown his tortoise through the greenhouse roof.
Gosh.
And he still didn't have his room back. Harry was thinking about this time yesterday and bitterly wishing he'd opened the letter in the hall. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia kept looking at each other darkly. When the post arrived, Uncle Vernon, who seemed to be trying to be nice to Harry, made Dudley go and get it. They heard him banging things with a smiting stick all the way down the hall. Then he shouted, "There's another one! Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4 Privet Drive." With a strangled cry, Uncle Vernon leapt from his seat and ran down the hall, Harry right behind him. Uncle Vernon had to wrestle Dudley to the ground to get the letter from him, which was made difficult by the fact that Harry had grabbed Uncle Vernon around the neck from behind. After a minute of confused fighting, in which everyone got hit a lot by the smelting stick, Uncle Vernon straightened up, gasping for breath, with Harry's letter clutched in his hand. "Go to your cupboard. Your bedroom," he wheezed at Harry. "Dudley, go. Just go." Harry walked round and round his new room. Someone he knew he had moved out of his cupboard, and they seemed to know that he hadn't received his first letter. Surely that meant they'd try again. And this time he'd make sure they didn't fail. He had a plan. The repaired alarm clock rang at 6 o'clock the next morning. Harry turned it off quickly and dressed silently. He mustn't wake the Dudleys. He stole downstairs without turning on any of the lights. He was going to wait for the postman on the corner of Privet Drive and get the letters for number 4 first. His heart hammered as he crept along the dark hall towards the front door. Ah! Harry leapt into the air. He had trodden on something big and squashy on the doormat. Something alive. Lights clicked on upstairs, and to Harry's horror, he realised that the big, squashy something had been his uncle's face. Uncle Vernon had been lying at the foot of the front door in a sleeping bag, clearly making sure that Harry didn't do exactly what he had been trying to do. He shouted at Harry for about half an hour and then told him to go make a cup of tea. Harry shuffled miserably off into the kitchen, and by the time he got back, the post had arrived. Right into Uncle Vernon's lap. Harry could see 3 letters addressed in green ink. He began, but Uncle Vernon was tearing the letters into pieces before his eyes. Uncle Vernon didn't go to work that day. He stayed at home and nailed up the letterbox. "See," he explained to Petunia through a mouthful of nails, "if they can't deliver, then they'll just give up." "I'm not sure that'll work, Vernon." "Oh, these people's minds work in strange ways, Petunia. They're not like you and me," said Uncle Vernon, trying to knock in a nail with a piece of fruit cake Aunt Petunia had just brought him. On Friday, no fewer than 12 letters arrived for Harry. They couldn't go through the letterbox. They had been pushed under the door, slotted through the sides, and a few even forced. through the small window in the downstairs toilet. Uncle Vernon stayed at home again. After burning all the letters, he got out a hammer and nails and boarded up the cracks around the front and back doors, so no one could go out. He hummed tiptoe through the tulips as he worked, and jumped at small noises. On Saturday, things began to get out of hand. 24 letters to Harry found their way into the house, rolled up and hidden inside each of the 24 eggs that their very confused milkman had handed Aunt Petunia through the living room window, while Uncle Vernon made furious telephone calls to the post office and the dairy, trying to find someone to complain to. Aunt Petunia shredded the letters in her food mixer. "Who on earth wants to talk to you this badly?" Dudley asked Harry in amazement. On Sunday morning, Uncle Vernon sat down at the breakfast table, looking tired and rather ill, but happy. "No post on Sundays," he reminded them happily as he spread marmalade on his newspapers. "No damn letters today." Something came whizzing down the chimney as he spoke and caught him sharply on the back of the head. Next moment, 30 or 40 letters came pelting out of the fireplace like bullets. The Dudley ducked, but Harry leapt into the air, trying to catch one. "Out! Out!" Uncle Vernon seized Harry around the waist and threw him into the hall, while Aunt Petunia and Dudley had run out with their arms over their faces. Uncle Vernon slammed the door shut. They could hear the letters still streaming into the room, bouncing off the floors and the walls and the floor. "That does it," said Uncle Vernon, trying to speak calmly, but pulling great tufts out of his moustache at the same time. "I want you all back here in 5 minutes, ready to leave, going away. Just pack some clothes, no arguments." He looked so dangerous, with half his moustache missing, that no one dared argue. 10 minutes later, they had and were in the car, speeding towards the motorway. He was sniffing in the back seat. His father had hit him round the head for holding them up while he had tried to pack his television, video, and computer in his sports bag. They drove. And they drove. Even Aunt Petunia didn't dare ask where they were going. Every now and then, Uncle Vernon would take a sharp turn and drive in the opposite direction for a while. Shake 'em off," he would mutter whenever he did this. They didn't stop to eat or drink all day. By nightfall, Dudley was howling. He'd never had such a bad day in his life. He was hungry. He had missed 5 television programs he had wanted to see, and he had never gone so long without blowing up an alien on his computer. Uncle Vernon stopped at last outside a gloomy-looking hotel on the outskirts of a big city. Dudley and Harry shared a room with twin beds and damp, musty sheets. Dudley snored, but Harry stayed awake, sitting on the windowsill, staring down at the lights of passing cars and wondering. They ate stale cornflakes and cold tinned tomatoes on toast for breakfast next day. They had just finished when the owner of the hotel came over to their table. "Excuse me, but is one of you Mr. H. Potter? Only I got about 100 of these at the front desk." She held up a letter so they could read the green ink address. "Mr. H. Potter, room 17, Railview Hotel, Cokeworth." Harry made a grab for the letter, but Uncle Vernon knocked his hand out the way. The woman stared. "I'll take them," said Uncle Vernon, standing up quickly and following her to the dining room. "Wouldn't it be better to just go home, dear?" Aunt Petunia suggested timidly. Hours later, but Uncle Vernon didn't seem to hear her. Exactly what he was looking for, none of them knew. He drove them into the middle of a forest, got out, looked around, shook his head, got back in the car, and off they went. Again. The same thing happened in the middle of a ploughed field, halfway across a suspension bridge, and at the top of a multi-story car park. "Daddy's gone mad, hasn't he?" Dudley asked Aunt Petunia dully late that afternoon. Uncle Vernon had parked at the coast, locked them all inside the car, and disappeared. It started to rain. Great drops beat on the roof of the car. Dudley snivelled. "It's Monday," he told his mother. "The great Humberto's on tonight. I wanted to stay somewhere with a television." Monday. This reminded Harry of something. If it was Monday, and you could usually count on Dudley to know the days of the week because of television, then tomorrow, Tuesday, was Harry's 11th birthday. Of course, his birthdays were never exactly fun. Last year, the Dudleys had given him a coat hanger and a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks. Still, you weren't 11 every day. Uncle Vernon was back, and he was smiling. He was also carrying a long, thin package and didn't answer Aunt Petunia when she'd asked what he had bought. "Found the perfect place," he said. "Come on, everyone, out." It was very cold outside the car. Uncle Vernon was pointing at what looked like a large rock way out to sea. Perched on top of the rock was the most miserable little shack you could imagine. One thing was certain. There was no television in there. "Storm forecast for tonight," said Uncle Vernon gleefully, clapping his hands together. "And this gentleman's kindly agreed to lend us his boat." A toothless old man came ambling up towards them, pointing with a rather wicked grin at an old rowing boat bobbing in the iron-grey water below them. "I've already got us some rations," said Uncle Vernon. "So all aboard?" It was freezing in the boat. Icy sea spray and rain cracked down their necks, and a chilly wind whipped their faces. After what seemed like hours, they reached the rock, where Uncle Vernon, slipping and sliding, led them to the broken-down house. The inside was horrible. It smelled strongly of seaweed. The wind whistled through the gaps in the wooden walls, and the fireplace was damp and empty. There were only 2 rooms. Uncle Vernon's rations turned out to be a packet of crisps each and 4 bananas. He tried to start a fire, but the empty crisp packets just smoked and shriveled up.
Oh, gosh.
"Could do with some of those letters now, eh?" he said cheerfully. He was in a very good mood. Obviously, he thought nobody stood a chance of reaching them here in a storm to deliver post. Harry privately agreed, though the thought didn't cheer him up at all. As night fell, the promised storm blew up around them. Spray from the high waves splattered the walls of the hut, and a fierce wind rattled the filthy windows. Aunt Petunia found a few mouldy blankets in the second room and made up a bed for Dudley on the moth-eaten sofa. She and Uncle Vernon went off to the lumpy bed next door, and Harry was left to find the softest bit of floor he could, and to curl up under the thinnest, most ragged blanket. The storm raged more and more ferociously as the night went on. Harry couldn't sleep. He shivered and turned over, trying to get comfortable, his stomach rumbling with hunger. Dudley's snores were drowned by the low rolls of thunder that started near midnight. The lighted dial of Dudley's watch, which was dangling over the edge of the sofa on his fat wrist, told Harry he'd be 11 in 10 minutes' time. He lay and watched his birthday tick nearer, wondering if the Dudley would remember at all, wondering where the letter writer was now. 5 minutes ago, Harry heard something creak outside. He hoped the roof wasn't going to fall in, although he might be warmer if it did. 4 minutes to go. Maybe the house in Privet Drive would be so full of letters when they got back. You might be able to steal one somehow. 3 minutes to go. Was that the sea slapping hard on the rock like that? And 2 minutes to go. What was that funny crunching noise? Was the rock crumbling into the sea? 1 minute to go. And he'd be 11. 30 seconds. 20. 10. 9. Maybe he'd wake Dudley up just to annoy him. 3. 2. 1. Boom! The whole shack shivered, and Harry sat bolt upright, staring at the door. Someone was outside, knocking to come in.
Well done. Well, there we go, guys. How about that? Hey, David. Well, look, this is the Hagrid rowing. Look at that. Yeah, isn't that a fantastic illustration?
Uncle Vernon.
Uncle Vernon, sorry. Yes, sorry.
Boom!
Boom. There we go.
I'm
So
very
that
happy
is
to be in the most beautiful place on earth.
yeah. The next chapter is the Keeper of the Keys, which is awesome. So we'll do that on the next stream because you're struggling, aren't you?
I don't mean to yawn, but
Are you bored?
no, I'm not.
She's drugged. It's the hay fever pill that does it to her, I'm afraid. Awesome. So yeah, so this is number one. We'll keep doing the streams. We'll try and do these fairly regularly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't worry if you miss a stream, because this is the whole idea of it. It'll be numbered, and if you still want to watch it and join in, you can either skip that one completely and wait till the next live, or catch up with that stream as and when. So that's the whole idea. I love this. I love this part of the book.
I was
you know,
laying in bed listening. Awesome.
who was Uriel? Oh, Uriel. Hope you're
Little
well.
Maddox.
Oh, Little Maddox. Sorry. Can we request books? That's what I've put in the Fred Book Club thread. So yes.
That's
Although
the
it
most
will take
pages.
quite a while.
I was going to say we are talking about 7 books here. We are going to be doing them
some
all,
of them massive.
and they're massive, and we're roughly getting through 2 to 3 chapters a stream. That's roughly, I think, going to be our pace.
Well, that's the most pages I read in a book.
I know, right? Little Maddox. No, I saw you said something about the Bible and the dictionary. We've got no interest in reading the dictionary. So 3 chapters per stream.
It's great
Then
to
we can
listen while
account
studying.
Yes. So roughly, I reckon at least 2 to 3 per stream, depending how long the chapter is or how quick we read it. So, I mean, this is all just bordering on that bit where I think it's brilliant how JK lets us know that Harry is something spectacular. And then there's all of that hardship that he goes through, and he's got no idea, and we know that he's something greater.
Yeah.
What have we got here? Great job on the reading. Maybe we could get more used to.
I've read all the books in Dutch. Fun to
David
hear them
Walker,
in
great job on the
original now.
reading. Maybe when get more used to it, face the camera and may make it better. Hey, dude, what? we're just normal. No, we can't. Sorry, it's like we're reading along. That is like really, really hard. There's a few times, but to kind of keep looking up and dude, we're not professional. You need auto
We don't
cue.
memorize the.
Yeah, you need an all that when they're doing that, like the stories and everything. They've got it all on behind the camera. If it was that, I'd be able to do that.
Yeah. Because the thing is, you're asking us to memorize the next 5
Yeah,
lines
and
read
look
it
up.
to
It's
the
not
screen.
happening. That isn't happening.
I've read them a lot, but I've not memorized them.
Yeah, absolutely. Are the books different to the film with any differences? There are, and that's what we'll discuss as we go along. There are a lot of differences, particularly characters involved and how those characters influence the story, and the like Peeves doesn't appear in the films whatsoever. Particularly at the end in book 7. There's one character that you get to see in the films that is pivotal in the battle. I'm not going to do any spoilers, but is pivotal in the Battle of Hogwarts. But you never get that in it, and so there is a lot that happens in the books that you don't get in the films.
Ollie has more guts than me. Thank you. Earlier, Darth turned round and said, "Great."
I love that by Thomas. Go on.
Yeah. Earlier, Darth turned around and said, "Great, a Mucklebee audiobook. Now I don't have to read myself."
Well, it's either if you want to read along with us or listen, it's absolutely fine. There was something. What was that? That Thomas said 198 chapters in total.
Wow.
Oh my gosh! Right. Okay.
Roughly how many streams would that be?
Divided by 3.
Divided by 3.
Can't do it right now.
7.
Couldn't do it anyway.
What's that? It's quite. Gosh.
7 streams to do 21.
70 streams nearly.
Wow.
Between 6. That can't be right. Well, if we've done 10 streams is 30 chapters. 30, 60, 90.
66 streams.
Yes, I wasn't far off when I said 70. Yeah.
Whoa. That's a lot.
So I'll probably be around 20 when we finish this.
Yeah, I think requesting other books is
A long way away.
yeah.
It's a free audiobook without any downloads involved.
Madhu, how are you? Hi.
Yeah.
Hi there.
And it's also, you don't get annoying ads in the middle, do you?
Well, you might do.
You might do after watching it back. I don't know. It's YouTube. Let's see.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
They just shove it in, don't they?
Order 66.
but yes, order 66. So there's a lot, particularly as we get
That's a cool image of it.
and it's just details of characters and plot lines and all the rest of it. And there's like bits with Dudley later on, and there's just that they didn't put into films because obviously they can't put everything in the film. You know, it's usually films are somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours long usually, and it's how they can push the story along and give you enough information. By the way, the link I was almost 100% correct, so I've put it in the book club thread for people who don't have it.
What I always wanted to do after I read the Harry Potters, I always wanted like Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and all of the original bunch to get together and literally use the books as a script. But yeah, that would be a long time.
Yes, if you want to, if you need the digital book, I'm with you.
I'll be back in just a moment.
Yes. So guys, yeah, we've got the book club thread. So anything to do with the books we're reading, feel free to have a chat on there. I've shared some of the key illustrations from the JK book on there. Check them out. It's a fabulous book. So if I was going to say, if you're ever going to buy the Harry Potter books, the illustrated one are more expensive, but I think are worth the money. So, because I love a good illustration, and they are fabulous. And I think the series isn't going to be completed until like 2025, something like that. I think
if we go at it in chunks of 3, I think we'll be good.
No, because we'll just switch over. I will be reading normal books.
Yeah.
I won't be doing the illustrated one on all the streams because they won't be out. We'll get this done within a few months.
All right.
Or
Cool.
so. 6 months
66
maybe.
days, 66 streams.
No way. Could you imagine it? Guys, we're going to do this non-stop here on out. Can we share just general book suggestions to other Discord members as well as in that thread? No, keep that one on topic for the actual book bits. I can always create another thread for literature if you want, and then it just keeps it on the stream. Right, guys, did you enjoy that? How was it reading?
Yeah, I really enjoyed
I
that.
like reading.
You just get into it, don't you?
I used to do that to my teddy bears. I used to line them up in front of me and I used to
And give
read
yourself
to
an
them.
audience.
Yeah.
See,
I used to read to Ducky.
read to Ducky.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying. I really enjoyed doing that with you. And to what David said earlier on in the stream, I get if we're looking down and reading and all the rest of it, but we're not. You got to remember, we are just ordinary people, a dad and his kids, and we're sharing a book that we really enjoy. So we are going to be looking down when we're reading. You need an auto cue behind the camera to be able to address the camera to read it. There's no problem with our ability to read and all of that sort of stuff. It is the fact that, well, yeah, it's reading from the book live.
If you do one stream per week, you will finish around my birthday next year.
Who said that?
Skylar.
Oh wow, we might have to do 2 a week.
I enjoyed it. Not worry, you did well. Consider us your teddies.
I've not read any of the Harry Potter books in years. I may go back and read them. This is the whole idea. This is what we're trying to do together.
Like the added sound effects as well.
Added sound effects.
Boom.
Oh, boom. Yeah. 6 times a week and you get Saturdays off. Yeah. I just really enjoy I enjoy books, and I'm gonna enjoy doing this with the kids. Biplap. Hello there, sir. How are you?
Get Laura into it and you can cut down the time.
Yeah. Well, we might rotate the personnel. It may be 4, we might go down to 3, 2, what it may be, just to keep it rolling. As always with the Geeks of Mucklebee, we are willing. It's just who's available at the time.
Yeah.
And it's a case of, if we feel like, oh no, do you know what, we really need to do another stream, then it might be just like, it could be one of us, it could be 2 of us, whatever it may be. I think that's fair. In agreement with that?
Yeah. If it was just me by myself, I'd be very tempted to start the stream. Then I'll stand over there, walk on, sit down, say, right, are you sitting comfortably?
Then I shall begin.
Here, I was just looking at the Keeper of the Keys.
Music.
Because it's that hand ollie from
the
Burgers
claw.
and Blots.
Oh yeah.
No.
What's
What's the creepy shot?
Borgin and Burke.
Borgin and Burke's. Borgin and Burke. I was doing Forest and Blots, was I? The Burgin.
Yeah.
And that one that always used to make you jump.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like there.
That's the hand.
The hand that Harry holds and then it grabs onto him in Borgin and Burke's. Every single time that we watched that, it made Oliver jump.
I think what's amazing about the Harry Potter as well is the characters that we love that don't come till book 2 or book 4. You know what I mean? There are.
I know who Rose likes.
Of course you do. You're her brother.
No, in the books.
Yes. That's what I was talking about. What are you talking about? What do you know? Tell us.
I thought you just had to say one word. Boots.
So do you go live on Twitch? We do occasionally. We've got to get.
Yeah.
We've got to do a bit more on Twitch. But yes, we do sporadically. Sometimes it's kind of like, hey, we're doing a load, and then we're not. It tends to be a bit more gaming streaming. But when it comes to this sort of thing, I think we're going to do YouTube.
Tomorrow.
Maybe we could. Are you feeling like you want to do some gaming streaming?
Yes.
Did you two enjoy that though?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes,
Well, guys, we hope that you were enjoying reading along with us. Don't worry if you've just joined the stream, because you can watch it back. It's us reading the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone book. So it's perfectly replayable. We read all the way through first 3 chapters, and we will be back because we've got the football this weekend, haven't we?
Yes.
We could do a midday on one of them, like either the Saturday or the Sunday, couldn't we, for the next one, do you reckon?
Mm-hmm.
So we might return with the book at the weekend. So awesome.
Loved it. Awesome. It's hard to do YouTube and Twitch.
Yeah, the Sorcerer's Stone for our American friends.
When I found out that it was also called that, I was just so confused.
Yeah, why can't you just call it the Philosopher's Stone? But they were like that. The Americans won't know what that means.
Well, then learn.
But they do. So it's just like, it's weird.
Sorcerer's Stone. Not saying it.
Hey, it is what it is. Great, David. I'm glad you had fun. Skylar, you too. Thank you for joining us. Weekend reads, awesome. Okay, then we definitely will. Because as Skylar said, if we was doing one a week, I mean, it's easy to get a stream done at a weekend on something like this. To get 3 chapters about hour and a half, so that's easy enough, isn't it?
Oh, and on Friday we've got we've got the football stream.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rose and Ollie, because me and the bear are out with our friends. So Rose and Ollie will be doing the Belgium-Italy stream. You're wanting to do that, right?
Yes.
I'll set it all up. You've just got to press go.
Okay. We might accidentally mess with some controls and then go, oh wait, start.
Hey, all on you.
We'll be talking on the stream for half an hour, then realise that we aren't streaming.
Yeah, you're not streaming at all. Yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you enjoyed that one. That was our debut. We done it. Woo! So on Discord we've got the book thread. So if you want to discuss the book, we'll be there. I've shared some of the illustrations if you want to see what the Jim K illustrations look like. And we will catch you on the next stream at the weekend.
Yes.
Book stream, that is, book club. So take care, everybody. Brilliant, Thomas. You guys take care, and we'll see you on the next one.
Stay happy, healthy, and safe.
Bye.
Good job.
Bye.
Well done. Oh, where's the mouse? I can't end it. It's not going to end. It's
Away.
the never-ending stream. Ah. Dee, dee, dee.